It is December 11th, 2023. I'm Hanson Sue.
Hi.
And start by introducing yourself.
I'm Rodney Brooks, former professor at MIT.
Okay, so what most excites you about chatbots and this technology moving into the future?
Clearly, we've reached a threshold where language generated by machine is much more natural and a level that we haven't seen before. It's not repetitive as we used to see in interactive speech systems or text systems. So we have a much richer language experience than we've had before.
Okay. What do you see as their greatest potential to benefit humanity?
If we can figure out how to box the large language models in so that they basically tell the truth, it gives us a great new level of interface to all sorts of systems, both text-based on the screen and then connecting speech generation and speech understanding in a rather dramatic fashion compared to what we've had up until 2023.
Great. What do you see as their greatest potential harm?
The challenge that I see for large language models and chatbots is that they're not actually coming up with any particular explanation. They're rather generating, one word at a time, what the most likely thing to say would be in the context of what they've been asked. But there's no guarantee about truth because they don't know what's true. They don't have a model. They just have statistical connections between words. So when they're on, they are so on. And when they go off the rails, they really go off the rails.
Why are some people talking about apocalypse and human extinction, while others are talking about utopia in connection to chatbots and AI?
I think with all technologies, there are people who are over-enthusiastic and people who are scared of them. And because we're dealing with language here, the stuff that makes us us, both extremes have really been pushed with this new technology. And some people see it as nirvana, we're going to get so much power from the machines. And others see we're going to get so much power from the machines, it's going to be really dangerous. And I think both extremes are extremes. Somewhere in the middle is where we probably will end up.
Are we worried about the right things?
There may be some weird things, some weird side effects of all these chatbots in that they take what we have in our existing corpus of knowledge, which is what they've been trained on, large fractions of the existing knowledge of the world, and they recycle it and re-say it, and somehow it gets degraded. So we may degrade our overall corpus of knowledge. We may not be able to tell from future versions of chatbots what's true and not true because it will have infiltrated so much of our web of knowledge that we won't be able to find a ground truth as much as we have up until now.
Are we hopeful about the right things?
In my opinion, people who think that this new generation of chatbots is getting us almost to artificial general intelligence are wrong. It's a power of language, but it doesn't change underlying reasoning, underlying modeling, underlying checking of facts. It's a nice component to have, but it's not the whole thing by a long, long shot.
Some experts think that today's chatbots have strong limitations and that we need to explore alternative approaches to AI. Why?
The chatbots today are chatbots. They chat. They essentially dream. They, take the context and what's something that follows on from it. But it's context in language. It is not related to underlying models that all of us people have. We know how things fit together. We know above and below. We have an intuitive understanding of gravity, not a description of gravity. We feel gravity. These chatbots don't know about that. So they can't have the same sort of understanding that a 18-month-old child has of the physics of the world. because they know what happens when they push, they know what happens when they pull, and they get surprised when it doesn't quite work.
If you could create your own chatbot, what would it be like, or what would it do?
I've never thought of creating my own chatbot. I leave that to the people who already do that sort of thing, because I'm much more interested in systems, robots that can interact with the physical world. And that's what, to me, is interesting, which doesn't mean chatbots aren't interesting in themselves. It's just not my thing.
Okay. So many commentators see the future of chatbots and AI as part of a power struggle between the United States and China. What do you think about this?
I'm a great believer in the international nature of science. That's how we have progressed as a species, with new innovations from all different parts of the world, from all different cultures over the last few thousand years. And especially in the 20th century, we saw science spreading across the world. And that's upended some of the old power structures, because now everyone has science. And I think that's a good thing. All people should have access. All people should be able to contribute. And different people will bring different points of view to the questions, and it will be richer for it.
Okay. So there are many issues about trust concerning chatbots, from the explainability of their operation to producing falsehoods and dangerous suggestions, to bias, and to the organizations that make and use them. So how important are these issues of trust to the future of chatbots?
It's hard to explain why a chatbot says a particular thing for two reasons. One is the mechanism for generating the text is fairly simple. It's what is the current context of words, a bag of tokens, questions, and what were the tokens I just generated? And that gets fed through a very simple feed-forward network of artificial linear neurons, but with no iteration, no loops, no search, nothing that you'd have in a classical computer program. And out pops the next word. Then that next word gets appended to what was already said, and it does the same thing again from scratch. So it doesn't have a plan for what it says. It's not trying to get to some goal. So for us, that's very hard to explain why it gets that sequence of words that it does. And it's also very hard to understand the hundreds of billions of weights that go into that forward computation through the neural network. A chatbot is never trying to say anything that's true. It's just trying to say the next word that is a likely next word based on the hundreds of billions of documents that it's seen. So when it's asked to generate a fairy tale, it says, well, what's a good first word? Once. Then, generate a fairy tale, and I've said once. What's the next most likely word? Upon. Once upon a time, but it doesn't plan to say that out. So it can wander off and get likely words in all sorts of directions. Whether they're true or not is a totally different sort of thing. Other people and I have also said that it's like being in a dream. There's some logical connection between pieces, but it's not necessarily the logical connection in the world. So what is true in the world and what is not true in the world, it has no idea. It doesn't even know about truth. And it's up to some box around it, or us, to discern what is truth and what is not truth. Our chatbots have been trained on hundreds of millions, billions even, of documents, text on the World Wide Web, scanned books from throughout history. And all of those things, every document has some sort of bias in it. What is the sum total of biases that get put into the ChatGPT or the chatbot? It's sort of unknown, but we see popping out of that in terms of likely words following other words. Sometimes we see some very biased and quite vile things coming out because that's been in the training corpus.
Okay. So creating chatbots and other AI systems uses a huge amount of energy and natural resources. Is AI environmentally sustainable?
All of us alive today have been trained by the existence of Moore's law to think things get faster and better again and again and again. And Moore's law was just amazing and made computers what they are. But even Moore's law is coming to an end. You can't sustain an exponential growth forever of anything because you run out of resources. And we're already seeing that with chatbots. The amount of training they take and the amount of energy they use, we're getting to the point where it's unsustainable to keep doubling the amount of energy for each new chatbot. We can't keep doing that. We've reached the energy limit of training.
Okay. So some experts say today's chatbots are stochastic parrots that give the appearance of understanding things, while other experts say that they are emergent learners that actually understand things about the world. Which is it for you?
I read a lot of commentary and a lot of papers about chatbots. And the people who are in the know, the people who design them, the people who build them, are all pretty consistent that what is generated is not some sort of model-based truth, but is what are the likely words following each other. There are other people who've seen the results of asking a chatbot to answer a question, and they infer much more competence from that performance, and then they start looking for it. And many have written papers trying to prove that they can extract a model from what the chatbot says. But if you look carefully at that, they're putting the model in their prompts, what they're asking. It's in their heads that knows what the model might be, what there might be some supporting facts, well, not exactly facts, some supporting correlations within the knowledge, within the learned neural networks that produce things that a model could produce. That doesn't mean that the system has a model that can apply or use in any particular way without that person generating the right prompts.
What do today's chatbots do best?
Today's chatbots take some set of context, some set of input tokens or words, and they're remarkable at how they can pull out similar pieces of text or pieces of text that those words would be associated with in the world's corpus of written knowledge, and then put them together in a coherent way which sounds like real language, whatever language it is, whether they're generating English or Chinese or whatever. So it's taking those very far-flung pieces and putting them together into coherent, good-sounding language.
What are their biggest weaknesses?
The weakness of chatbots is that they are chatbots. They don't know what they're talking about. They only know about correlations that they have seen again and again, perhaps billions of times, in different documents across the corpus of training. But they don't have an underlying model of the world with which they can reason in the way that even an 18-month-old child can reason.
Are chatbots conscious?
Chatbots aren't conscious. They're not even awake. They are just symbol correlation machines which spit out the correlations and have a sequencer that turns it into language. It's remarkable the language that comes out, but they are not beings in any shape or form.
What is key for the development of chatbot technology?
Chatbots are remarkable in their facility with language. I think for them to be long-term useful, we need find ways of training them on smaller data sets and still getting that facility, training them using less energy and getting that facility of language, and having some way to put boxes around them so that when what they say is not accurate, that doesn't lead to actions outside of them that we might end up regretting.
Okay. What are the critical factors for how chatbots are used?
Pretty much all of our successful AI systems up to this time have involved a person in the loop, and the person makes a judgment about what to do. A search engine delivers a bunch of different options, and the person goes and looks at the first one first, because that's the most likely. But if that doesn't have the right stuff, they go to the second, the third, the fourth. The person is the overall arbiter. With the language capabilities of chatbots, there's a temptation to take what they say at face value, and how we engineer it so that that face value becomes something that's more examinable by people to decide whether they can trust or not is very important going forward.
Okay. What is the most important thing for everyone to understand about chatbots?
I think people need to understand that a chatbot is not an entity. It doesn't have any goals. It's a correlation matrix, if you like. There's a bunch of words in the question, correlate to this word and then that word and then that word in the answer. It's a correlation matrix. It's not a thinking, reasoning system, despite the fact that it produces just fantastic language, which makes us think it's a being, but it isn't.
Okay. And what can we learn from the history of chatbots and AI?
Chatbots have been around for 60 years. One of the first ones, Eliza, was produced at MIT by Joseph Weizenbaum. And he was appalled at even this very simple chatbot he wrote in the mid-60s was taken to be a real being by people who used it. And they would sit for hours and pour out their hearts to it. And its language was so simple compared to what we have today, but still it drew people in. The ability to talk to something leads people to trust it in ways that we must be very careful about.
So I've heard the quip, when you hear AI, look for the people. Is that true of today's chatbots, and how so?
Many of the deployed systems we have in AI involve people. It might be you, it might be the user. You're the people, you're the person. And in a sense, that's the only person involved in these chatbots as they are deployed. There were a lot of people tweaking up what's in them beforehand. Thousands of people working fairly low wages to round some edges on them. But when they're deployed, once they're deployed, there is no person in the loop except you. And since the chatbots are so eloquent with language, they can tell you something that which is maybe not true at all, and you can't figure out how to know whether it is true or not. And the chatbot has no idea whether it's true or not.
Okay. Can we regulate chatbots, and if so, how?
Our modern society works because we have regulations and standards. But those regulations and standards are mostly about what the thing does, not how it's constructed. So it's the performance of the airplane part, the strength, the longevity of it that matters in regulating airliner parts. The particular material is usually not regulated. If someone can come up with a better material that does what we want that part to do, that's fine. So the challenge for regulating chatbots is how do we define what it is they do rather than what went into them to make them do that. And I think that will be the place we'll be able to successfully regulate things.
What are some of the security implications of chatbots?
There's a security question about the training of chatbots. What documents have got in there? What correlations are there? And how might those correlations just pop out in some answer the chatbot gives later? So some classified fact, some piece of data that a company doesn't want given to other people. If their documents were used in training, somewhere in those correlations, there might be some information that pops out later that people didn't want. And that gets back to where do where did all these billions of documents come from that are used for training? And it's not clear that everyone has given permission for their documents to be used that have been used. There's a question of security in terms of what a chatbot might say, which leads the person who's talking to take some action. And that is a difficult thing for us to understand at the moment, what that chain of events might be. Because the person might be talking to the chatbot and giving more and more questions, which gives more and more input context, which is sort of pushed towards the things which are the the biggest insecurity of that person. They're talking to this chatbot who's listening to them and responding appropriately. They tell it things about themselves, and then out comes some wild course of action suggested to them, which might be quite destructive.
What's the story with chatbots and copyright and other intellectual property concerns?
Chatbots have been trained on massive amounts of documents and novels, textbooks, etc. Recently, I asked a chatbot to write a sonnet in the style of Shakespeare's 18th sonnet, and out it popped, and it was in the style of Shakespeare's 18th sonnet. So I'm sure if I asked about more contemporary artists, it would be able to generate things in their style. Ooh, well, who owns their style? The original artist? Or now, when does it get into the zeitgeist? The way Shakespeare has gone into the zeitgeist. And chatbots are an accelerator of taking people's writing and putting it into the zeitgeist.
How do chatbots affect privacy?
Since people ask questions, say things to chatbots, and that goes into their input token buffer, there's a question of how that input token buffer is used. Is it reused? Is it kept around? Do other people who start asking questions come across, the chatbot in a state which has the token buffer from someone else who talked to it previously? In that case, it's a real privacy problem. And that's actually probably a fairly simple way that chatbots could be regulated, saying you can't keep anyone's token buffer for another user. That's a pretty straightforward, clean way of cleaning up some of that privacy issue.
Are there any other ones that you think of, or is that it?
The large chatbots that people have been using, owned by the large companies, have been trained on a lot of documents, and there is no clear description from those companies about what documents they used, whether they were copyrighted, whether they came from people's mail systems. The companies haven't said. And so we don't know whether a lot of private information has gone to their training or not. We don't know.
Okay. Are chatbots going to take people's jobs? And if so, whose?
In the short term, we overestimate technology and think they're going to change the world fundamentally. And usually they don't in the short term. Some of them do in the long term. And some of them change jobs. It's very rare that a new technology takes over a job completely, but they change jobs. And chatbots will, in the longer term, make some changes to many sorts of jobs. To probably anyone who writes. They'll change some of the things they do, some of the pieces of workflow that people go through. So there will be changes, but it's never a simplistic take away jobs. It's much more a modification of how we work with technology, who benefits most from it, and whose life it makes a little harder.
So then how might chatbots affect science, technology, and medicine?
The underlying technology for chatbots dealing with linear strings of tokens has been quite remarkable in how good it is with language. And it turns out to be good with things like DNA and RNA sequences for all sorts of questions. there's sort of a land rush going on right now with science saying, can it help me? Can it do my problem? Some problems it might help with, others it may do nothing, because it's a very particular sort of correlation mechanism based on these linear strings, and based on how different positions in those linear strings influence other parts of the linear strings in a way that we don't have a good mathematics about. So it will be useful for some aspects of science, not as a generator of science, maybe, as a way that people talking to them may get correlations and piece of information to follow up on, which may or may not be true, but some of the true ones will be useful. And it may actually do some sort of data reduction, some data modeling for some fields, which turns out to be very powerful, as it has for language, human language. We can't tell in advance which ones it will work for. A lot of people are trying. Some people will end up having wasted a lot of time to find it didn't work. Others will find great tools that they can use.
Okay. How might chatbots affect programming and computer science?
Through some careful experiments that have been done recently, it's pretty clear that chatbots are good at producing code for problems that have been solved many times before, or very similar problems. Once you get outside that place, not so useful. I myself have been fooled by chatbots telling me how to do something very tricky and very difficult. And then when I've struggled for a few hours and said, where's the documentation on that thing you told me about? The chatbot saying, I'm sorry, that thing doesn't exist. So for coding problems that have been done a lot of times before, great. For new stuff, difficult stuff, not so great.
How do science fiction and popular culture figure into people's reactions to chatbots?
If we look carefully at science fiction and popular culture and its views of what computers will be able to do in the future, you have to look at when that particular TV episode was made, when that story was written, because the projections are actually very similar to whatever the technology was at that time. If you look at the computers of the original Star Trek compared to the computers of Star Trek The Next Generation, compared to the computers of today's Star Trek, the expectations have changed. So science fiction sort of primes people to understand stuff, but not too far from what it is. I think chatbots have been a big jump in language facility, being able to generate and deal with human language. So I'm not sure science fiction is that informative to us on how it will be in the next 10 or 20 years, because it's sort of a real change in how computers can do things.
What do you think are the economic implications of chatbots?
As I think about the economic implications of chatbots, I see a couple of different things. First, how can chatbots do some task for us which is worthwhile at a lower cost and lets us do more stuff? But I think there's also an opportunity cost with chatbots. One of the opportunity costs is how much of the cloud and energy goes into training them, how expensive that is for companies. Another opportunity cost is how much this shiny new thing pulls people away from other technologies which were doing pretty well. And for instance, so much venture capital money goes into chatbots, too much goes into chatbots, and it starves other things that we really need as a society, especially when society's aging. We don't just need programs that talk to people, we need robots that help people as society's aging, for instance. So there's economics is a complex thing, and I think it's complex with chatbots. It will do both good and bad, and we need to be alert and try to call out when we see it doing bad and find ways to fix that.
Are chatbots something that only big companies can make?
At the moment, the large models that we have are only being generated by large companies. We've had large models, millions of computer images which were generated at Stanford University, for instance, but that was with a lot of government funding. So these things have taken traditionally a lot of funding, whether it's from the government or whether it's from companies. The question will be how much that can be democratized, what can be done with smaller models. Working on more efficient ways to train them may lead to them being able to be done by smaller organizations, and the way the big companies push computer technology, GPUs, etc., may trickle down and let smaller players do more interesting things. That I think we're going to have to watch over the next 10 to 20 years, and I think anyone who thinks they can predict exactly what's going to happen is most likely wrong. It's going to be a complex interplay of things.
How important are critical voices to the development of chatbots and AI?
There's a lot of hype about chatbots today, and hype leads to hubris on the part of the people who control them. Hubris meaning they think they understand the risks, they understand what's good for people, but let's be clear, they're driven by their personal economic outcomes. It's good to have other people who's are not going to benefit economically from these systems and are looking out for people who are going to get hurt in some way by these systems. So critical voices are important. As with too much hype, sometimes the critical voices go off the deep end too far. It's a hard thing for each of us to look at these extremes and figure out where some sort of truth is. But the history of the world tells us it's very rarely at this end or at that end. It's normally somewhere in the mushy middle, and there are no clear answers.
Could you talk a little bit more about who you think will be hurt by chatbots and how?
At the moment, I can't see a way that chatbots directly hurt people too much. But I do see ways they indirectly hurt. One way is if a particular chatbot gets packaged into a software module that gets sold to companies, and its output is used to make decisions about what customers get served well, what terms customers have, and there's no voice of those customers or voice for those people, it could turn into a sort of scam, which many technology systems have enabled in the past. And so the less technologically adept, the less rich people, the less privileged people will not have the tools to overcome whatever biases or whatever systems get put in place for them, rather than for the wealthy who know how to use the system and whose voices will be heard.
Talk a little bit about the knowledge navigator.
In the somewhat early days of Apple, when John Scully was running it, and we already had the Macintosh, we already had bitmap displays, they produced a little vignette, a little movie of what life might be like in the future, the knowledge navigator. And it was a professor preparing for class and sending emails by voice and talking to the system. And it wasn't presented as we already have this. It was presented as this is where the future is going. And some of that future is only now catching up with us, with chatbots, for instance. But I think it was a really great thing that they did, because it set researchers going on natural language, on planning, on all sorts of research topics, because they could see, this could all come together in this interesting way. Oh, but here's a thing that is necessary for it. I can work on this problem. So presenting the future in a coherent vision is challenging, but the Knowledge Navigator did it. And back in the movie 2001, there were no computer graphics, but they had computer graphics on screens in that movie. That presented the idea of having computer graphics. So sometimes these either science fiction stories or these vignettes from forward-looking companies, as long as they're presented as vignettes of what could happen in the future, can be very productive and move technology along.
All right. Thank you.